Hi, I'm Steve Moss, and I'm founder and president of Executive Springboard. And we're holding a webinar today with my guest, Cathy Mahone. And Cathy is the former Chief Administrative Officer at Allianz and Venerable. She's the founder, president, and executive coach at Forward Cadence Consulting. And she's an executive mentor at Executive Springboard. Cathy, welcome.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, it's great to have you here. And as we get started here, an intimate group, um, if you could provide your email address with us in the chat, if you didn't come in through a sign up, that would be a help. Um, and that way, my AI note taker will be able to find you and pass along a copy of this. Um, Cathy, I know that your coaching and consulting practice includes a focus on alignment and resilience. And it may be fair to say that resilience is your superpower, both on a personal and an organizational level. Just so we're on the same page, can you tell me what you mean by resilience and what you don't mean?
Sure. Yeah. And thanks again, Steve, for having me. And I'm really excited about this topic. I think before I do, though, I wanted to just give a little bit of my story, but I want to
Please do that.
acknowledge that everybody has their story. So it's not that, I'm resilient because of all these things in my story, but it does, this is how you build resilience is through your experience. So I was the CAO at Allianz for 10 years, and then 4 years prior to that, I was head of operations. And then the last couple years, I was at Venerable, a private equity reinsurer. And what that means is being a CAO, you have operations, IT, the project management office, and possibly HR. And so these functions, especially operations and IT, always have challenges. HR too, but the ones that are client facing a lot of times are coming from ops and IT because there's continuous change always being introduced, whether it's through new products, new services, what have you. So having these organizations, you're used to things going bump in the night. And when these systems do have issues, they're very visible and often client facing. On the home front, I also had a lot of challenges, and I think that's important. Resilience isn't just at work. We're these people that have home lives and work lives, and we're always between them. But I was raising my twin sons, both who are autistic and requiring a lot of support. And also, my husband was a 20-year war veteran, so he served in Black Hawk Down. He had three Purple Hearts, a Silver Star. And Green Beret Special Forces. He was a sniper. He was doing really crazy stuff. But he was 120% disabled at this time as I was having these large roles in the corporate world and with my kids. We lost him in 2018 due to all of this. So a lot of, I feel like sometimes a lot of people were like, you're so resilient. It's like, why? Just because you have a lot of things happening to you? That's not what it is. So but it does add context.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So resilience, what does it mean? So to me, it's when you're faced with a challenge, it's the ability to manage your fears. It's fear-based. Manage your fears and stay humbly grounded to get yourself and others through uncertainty and actually become stronger on the other end. What it isn't, it doesn't mean you suppress all of your emotions, that you have nerves of steel, or you just have the ability to survive. That's not what it is. It's not reacting, but it's responding with purpose. So,
That's a great definition, and the role of fear or just dealing with stress in general, I think is a really important thing to keep in mind. What, why is it that resilience seems so important today, and we hear more and more about it? What factors do you think are compounding why it's seen as increasingly as a competitive advantage?
yeah, it's definitely a competitive advantage because your resilient teams are going to move faster than the competition. So when you have a team that isn't resilient, what do they do when faced with adversity or change? They freeze, and that's how they react to disruption. Freeze. They lose time as there's a lot of confusion. There's looking for who to blame. There might be overanalysis, which takes time, and there's a huge emotional churn on the team. And to my earlier point, teams are really reacting to fear when there's change. When you have a resilient team, experienced, there's going to be less friction, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be able to, and this, when things are more efficient, that compounds over time, and that's where you get your advantage. There's less burnout, there's faster recovery, and the ability to actually focus on growth. So I think a way of looking at it is the setbacks are really looked as data points, not danger, so that the setback then can fuel innovation. So, yeah.
It's
I
hard
want to
in
jump in here
Go ahead, please,
and
Rob.
say I've spent a career started at Navy nuclear power, and in the utility industry for, the next 20 something years, and have worked in what maybe is an industry that is very more mature, I'm going to say, use that word with a grain of salt. And then in the last 3 years, I worked for more of a startup company. And I see this resilience being more important than ever in a startup company because it's a less mature industry. We're in a microgrid uh, industry, and it's not as established. And you may be working hard and find out that something has gone completely different than you thought it would be. And you have to, like you said, Cathy, you have to adjust. And as we're fear-based and emotional, I think it does cause overanalysis. It does cause emotional reactions. And at the end of the day, in the growth space, the companies that are going to be successful can move past that stuff and get to that was fine. We're on the wrong track. It's a data point. We're learning from it. And we're now have adjusted to be a successful young company.
Yeah, no, that's, and another point on that, remember in the past, it was called the learning organization, right? I think it's the same thing. You need to learn from your mistakes and move quickly through it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not always easy though, is it, to recognize in the moment that in fact this is a lesson?
Not at all. I mean, it's honestly myself, I wear this. It's easy to react with some amount of emotion.
Yeah.
Best thing you can probably do is take a deep breath and don't reply
That's
to the
it.
email too
Yep.
quickly.
Yeah, I think that comes into play. So when you're faced with the fear, when you're trying to think clearly under pressure, Cathy, what are some of the common things that you see people doing? What are observational practices within thinking of resilience?
Well, I'll just take from my experience, and I used to be an avid diver back in, I think, the 90s. I could brag about having 100 dives under my belt, doing cenote days and all these crazy things before kids. But you know, the most important part of the training, I'll never forget. So you do all this training in a pool, and then they put you over in a cold lake in Minnesota, and you can't see anything. It's not in the Caribbean, and you survive and you get certified. But what they train you is that when you're confronted with a situation, that there's this protocol. It's called stop, breathe, think, and act. So, Rob, you're right. Stop, right? The first thing is to interrupt the natural emotional surge that you have going on when something happens, and don't react and make the problem worse. Then breathe, that's to regulate the nervous system and restore clarity to the brain, right? Reasoning. And then think, that's assessing the situation. What's really happening here? What's the real risks that we have? What are the real options that we have to move forward? It really shifts you from that reaction to the reasoning that I was saying. And then act is now move forward with intention. And clarity beats panic every time, you know. So I think that's just real simple, because when you're in a, I always tell people, put that up on your sticky note somewhere, so if something hits you emotionally, it's just like when you get spam or something. When something hits you emotionally, stop, right? And think.
And breathe.
And breathe. Well, breathing, yeah. And when you're underwater and you don't have any air, then panic. You're done. No.
No, but that's a the breathing is the resetting, right?
Yeah.
It's all right, you've paused, but then, you've got to get your footing. And that's
Yeah.
really kind of how that impetus starts, I would think.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about a few dimensions of resilience, whether it's as a person, as a leader, as an organization. And hopefully you have some tips on areas that on ways that people can become more resilient. In an hour-long discussion, we can't make big you know um, shifts in people's mindset, but I think maybe there are some hints that you can give us along the way. But let's start on the personal level. Um, you've talked a little bit about your own experiences and how that's led to your resilience. Um, you work with people who exhibit emotional resilience and others not so much. What are qualities that you see differentiating and that particularly at on the personal level?
Yeah, no, sure. So, I a couple of things. First, there's a quality of having a bigger purpose and meaning.
Mm,
And hopefully this isn't too deep, but I think a resilient person really anchors themselves in something larger. You might say values, mission, their identity, a higher contribution or what have you. But I think it's emotionally being able to get perspective. And I'll share some funny stories with you. You know, Early on in my career, really early on. I mean, I was running a PMO at Ameriprise. I mean, it was early on, but it was, I was a VP level. I was like, I had 80 FTEs and I thought I was pretty important. I thought, and I would always share on the ride home and going to work. Every day I'd call my mom or my grandma in the morning and my dad actually in the afternoon. And I would complain, tell them everything. They knew all the players at work. They had, they knew the rundown of all the political situations, what those were back in those days. But they'd listen. And my grandmother finally said, Catherine, that's what she'd call me. Fair is the condition of the sky. Because I'd be complaining things weren't fair, these things are blowing up or whatever. She'd say, fair is the condition of the sky. And it took me a while to understand what she meant, but it just, it's like, move on, you know. And then my dad, it was almost around the same time, he said, Cathy, why are you so worried about this and upset about this? And what's the worst thing they can do to you at work? And I'm like, well, they can fire me. And he said, no, they could kill you, but it's against the law. They'd go to jail. So, I mean, these are a little dramatic, but it was so funny. And then, of course, my husband, and some of you have missed, but he's gone now, but he was a Green Beret Special Forces. I'd come home with my problems at work or big situations that happened. And he looked at me and said, did your best friend die in your arms today? He didn't understand the corporate world at all. So I would say at a young age in my corporate life, I had perspective. I really, and having perspective means that you can just really more clearly see the situation and what you have control of, and then be able to bring it down and help lead the team. So that would be one quality. A couple more, Steve, I would say having realistic optimism. So, not acting like everything is okay, but holding out hope while acknowledging reality. And I think what this does is give confidence to the team. And then I think what's key, another quality for it's a resilience, is it's actually a core skill for resilience, is having strong supportive relationships. Um, Resilient people never go it alone, in my opinion.
mm,
That you have a network that you can go to. It grounds you, it surrounds you with support where you can be even more vulnerable. It can be a backdrop to having folks that you trust to be able to say, hey, you're off kilter here. This doesn't, to really get that feedback. So I think that's key as well.
well, and there's a bunch to unpack there. That notion of perspective is kind of key because it kind of helps put the size of the problem where it should be. right?
Right. Right.
Somebody wasn't dying in your arms.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes. I
yeah.
mean, that's a little dramatic, but it really made me think. And so I could never really bring problems home anymore. It was like, all right.
Or you just knew what kind of response you
I
would
knew what
get.
response
Right.
I'd get.
And that was in maybe a bizarre way part of the support system.
It was. No, it was. He was being completely serious as how I'm feeling, I mean, he knew how I felt, but it was perspective in its strongest sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And going back to kind of the four steps that you're talking about, stop, breathe, think, act. That act was it was with intention. And that's another thing that's important in this process as well, I think. So, okay, if a lot of this, again, to think about at the personal level, but some of that carries over into somebody's leadership as well. So, for instance, you mentioned the realistic optimism, which is probably something it's great to have for yourself, but it's really a critical thing to have in as a leader. Leaders put pressure on themselves in times of change and stress. And while there are external factors that they have to deal with, they're dealing with their own emotions as well as their teams. So part of this, and you and I've talked a little bit about this, is creating safe spaces for yourself or for your team in the process of becoming more resilient. Love you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'll share a story. So I was at Allianz at the time, and at that time, there was some contention between audit and the business. Okay, there's a lot of companies have this, right? Um, it was a Friday afternoon, and one of my team members called and said, one of our audits, just the audit report went directly to the board and to the supervisory committee, which is in Munich. I mean, it went to the top. I go, what? Because we had protocol where you meet with the business over and over again, you agree on the action plans, and then, then it gets produced and it gets communicated. This was so bad that it went directly to the top without jumping over myself, who was, I report to the CEO. It should, before it goes anywhere, it should come through me, and it didn't. And so my team was calling me. They were all upset. I'll never forget the intersection I was driving through when I got the call. And it's like, what? Like, what is happening? What were the results? Well, we don't know. It was so bad. So, so first thing I did, of course, was call my boss just to say, hey, something's up. I don't understand it, but I'll, take care of it. And he was in a pickle too. So,
Right. He didn't know about this either.
no,
It went over his head as well.
yeah, I mean, it was just gone. So the first thing, what I did is I stopped. I really did. I said, what can I control here? Nothing's going to happen over the weekend. I don't know what's happening. I need more data. And then as I was breathing, right, I'm thinking, okay, Walter needs me now more than ever because this thing has just went to the top. It's going to be like, what's happening? So he needs me, and I didn't need him to tell me that. I just knew that he's going to need me. And so what I did on Monday, of course, is I got the team into the room and I made sure that they knew that this was on my shoulders first. You know what I mean? Like I was going to be the tip of the spear of figuring this out, and that we really needed to stay focused and together on this and figure it out, and not panic. Let's just stick together and figure out what we need to do. So we framed up the problem, and then we started doing the analysis. So we kind of, I'll give you an example of what it was, since I won't tell you too long in this story, but instead of a 30% issue of something being wrong, it was a 0.0013 issue. So when you did the math, it was like, I don't know, some really minuscule amount
Okay.
that didn't matter, that what have you. Okay, that's just the situation. So you can imagine. So what we had to do is take some time, though, to really be able to methodically go through all of their data and all of the information to not only convince my boss or other people, but to convince audit. So we had to take that very carefully and not blame, and just really just focus on getting the data right. And then while that was happening, the board is having a time. I took on the role of going to the board immediately and saying I'm accountable, because we didn't know what it was yet. We didn't know if it was wrong or not. I'm accountable. And my team was watching me do this. So they felt safe. And then they felt even more that they wanted to support me for doing that. I had to go in as Sandra Bullock because I was so angry. So this is resilience doesn't mean that you don't have emotions. I was so mad that this was happening, but you have to be able to handle those emotions. And so I'm like, well, maybe I'll be Angelina Jolie. I'll go into the board because I can't be myself because I'm pissed. And the funny part is she's much too pretty and slender. I could never pull that off. So I said, Sandra Bullock's a little, but I had to really find a way from humor inside myself to be able to go in there and be able to tell them I was accountable. Here's what we're going to do and regain their confidence. So in the end, we did that. I had to go on a road show to Munich and meet with the CFO, the group CFO, the head of audit. And it was a trying time. But again, I think the way we handled it was really well. And we were all learning to be more resilient. You're never perfect, but it's building on those skills. And it worked. So I think that's,
One of the things that you said early on in this process with your team was you took accountability and you said you need to figure it out. So it's clear you don't have the answers right now.
Right.
Right. And there's kind of that piece that I think is important in the process that you went through. It was to get clarity rather than be able to project certainty, because you didn't have certainty. You didn't know what the problem was at all. But establishing clear goals and going through the analysis, that was kind of a way that everybody starts to catch their breath and find out the scope of the issue.
And that's how you communicate, right? Through data versus the emotions. It's like, the data is going to come out. We can argue on the data points, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So in a situation like that, where the flow of information is actually past not just you, but your boss as well. I imagine part of what you're doing in this is, because it doesn't look good for anybody in this situation. Part of it is what you're doing for your own team to build them up, but you had a role also to probably help your boss in his own resilience.
Right. Right. Well, and some of that is, hey, if this is true, probably it's not good for me. You can always make that call, right? But yeah, I mean, I think, and Walter always said, if I want Cathy to do something, I'll just tell her she can't do it. So I think it was important for me to feel safe. He had confidence in me. And when we were talking one-on-one, he supported me. I knew he had the confidence in me. And I think that's important as well, is, I need that from him. So then that can help me be able to regulate my emotions. But there's been situations where you don't have support. You gotta, you have to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of this is also about trying to set realistic goals, which is something, again, as you talked about, that need for realistic optimism. And here it comes out with your team, where you don't have the answers, but it's probably as much as anything you trying to communicate your trust in them, that helps create that sense of optimism.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. Okay. I'm thinking about organizations that you've worked in, not so taking it out of the personal side and thinking for the company, what were some of the things that organizations do to exhibit resilience? Is it the same manifestation? Are there other things that you see?
I think some of the things in a company, are you thinking about maybe maybe operating model type of things. I mean, the more that you're clear on objectives, I think it's important. If everybody understands their objectives, then you're understanding data. It goes back to data. But if you're talking about how does an organization build resilience, it starts at the top. It really does. If you have a company that's really into blaming and people get fired every time there's an issue or what have you, that's going to set up a, an organization that's fear-based. But I think that there's some skills that the organization can use that is data driven. So for example, having standard operating procedures, for some of your key processes, right? Active succession planning, maybe having key roles that are identified as critical, making sure that there's a pipeline, making sure that there's decision-making clarity, whether it's RACI, if you've heard of RACI, that you have KPIs. Some companies I know, they don't have any KPIs, so you don't even know what the health of the organization is. And you can't even foresee something coming that's going to be a disruptor to, or what have you. So as companies have more KPIs, key performance indicators, if you're mature with that, you can then have what's called leading indicators. So you can see a storm coming, which is really great. And I talked earlier about a culture of continuous learning. Make sure that the CEO or the senior team is asking questions about, hey, how did we resolve that setback? Reward people for celebrating innovation that might come out of a setback, or just being able to recognize it and talk about it. And then finally, I'll just tell you what I did one time is I had my head of ops and head of IT do a job swap for 3 months. They literally changed offices. The ops guy was making all the IT decisions, or, in that realm. And my IT guy Jeff was over in operations running that. That was another way to continue to foster these support and relationships, which matter when things go wrong, because these leaders now knew some of the next level leaders, and there was relationships built. So again, when a problem came up, they knew people, and the way that they resolved it was faster, more flexible, compounded, and got through it in a supportive way.
That's really important, and the fact that there are processes or things to try to do, even if it's moving people around. And one of the things I think is often critical with leadership teams is for people to feel like they have permission to get out of their own lanes.
Yeah.
And that's putting somebody in a 3-month assignment where they're living in somebody else's lane is a great way of doing that.
Yeah, and can the other leader give it up? Can they let go of that control? I mean, that seemed to be the even harder part.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
You said something at the beginning of talking about organizational resilience, in that it starts at the top. But there's I don't think this was how you meant it, but it's something worth bringing out, which is sometimes organizations rely on people to be heroes to save them from these kinds of situations. And the problem is what happens when they're not in the room, right?
Right.
How does the organization then how is it able to adapt to the situations they find themselves in? I think a lot of that does lead itself to, whether it's aspects of culture, or as you've suggested, it's having those processes in place that can be really critical in their continued success.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's dangerous to have heroes, meaning, so for example, maybe there's only one actuary that's really, who knows, or maybe it's one person in IT that really knows the old clunky system that a lot of policies are on. You know what I mean? So going back to my, standard operating procedures and things like that, it's important. but you're also not building for the future. And if those people get picked off, and then you end up, because they're probably some of these key resources, then you're paying them. Some of them may not be, maybe they're heroes, but are they the best leader for the organization? It's content, maybe knowledge that they have or something that's that you're paying for to keep them there, but that's not helping the organization long term for the future, because they can be plucked out, and then you're in a world of hurt, and it's going to take you time to be able to recover and to figure it out.
Yep. Yep. And so thinking about that pipeline depth can be a critical thing. Just making sure that it puts a couple new elements in what people think of in succession planning, because it's not just about that replacement for somebody in a particular thing. It's making sure that you've got the capabilities to withstand the crises that might come up, and where that might be, and how you can share the institutional knowledge inside an organization to make sure that the SOPs are known by whoever has to act on them. That's great.
Succession planning, it shouldn't stop at just saying who's going to take whose role, but it's really looking to say what skills does this person need to be successful in that role, and maybe it's even the next role. And maybe this is the plug for executive coaching, but this is a great time to be able to, as part of their succession plan, to say, well, we're going to give John some more experiences, leading a project, or it might be there's probably many things there that the leader can create to really be able to give John a real opportunity to stretch some skills. Part of it might be coaching, but there really should be deliberate things, or it might be learning a new skill or learning a new area to be able to make sure that they're developed for that, to be successful in that plan. Yeah.
I think we're seeing some movement that's healthy there, in that it used to be way too often the conversation ended with this person will be ready in some amount of time.
Right.
And two things always come to mind to me on that. One is, if you tell somebody that they're going to be ready in a year, or their note is that, what are you doing in that year to get them ready, so that a year from now you're not saying, oh, they'll be ready in a year, because nothing has changed in how you do this. But the other thing is saying they'll be ready when, and then you can build in the capabilities that are necessary for whatever is you've been thinking about for their for a more senior role for them.
Right. I mean, you're going back to data, right? So here's the data that
Exactly.
really demonstrates that this person is ready for that next level, right?
Yep.
Kathy,
we've talked about a little bit about personal resilience, and the resilience of a leader, and resilience in organizations. And the last thing that I threatened at the beginning of this was to talk about what are some of those small personal practices that we can use to sustain resilience. So besides getting better at breathing, what are some things that you could suggest?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from others too on this. I'm just going to go back to that having perspective, and I think one of the things for me is to travel, so I've traveled quite a bit, because I remember being in Cancun or Cozumel, one of those, a long time ago, and it was in the morning. I had too much. I'm sure we partied the night before. I was, trying to sleep in, and I hear this hammering. And I get up, and I'm like looking out at this gazebo over in the pool, and there's these guys up there hammering away, fixing this, roof. And I'm like, don't they know I'm trying to sleep? Like what's with this, right? And then I realized they don't know what Ameriprise is. That's when I worked at Ameriprise, or what was it called then, American Express Financial Advisors. But they don't know anything about that, nor does it matter to their life whatsoever. And it probably never will. And so I think just traveling gives you a perspective of how tiny and unimportant you really are in the whole scheme of things. And that sounds kind of sad, but I liked it. It was like, okay, it just perspective. The other thing I think is continuous learning. So after Jay passed, I went and I'm a beekeeper. So I think
Mm.
continuing to learn new things. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know if I was allergic, but I went and said, well, I'm gonna learn how to do this. And I'm now a beekeeper. So Steve, I'll send you some bee or some honey, not bees,
Wonderful.
if you
I,
want the honey.
I'm not a beekeeper, but I am
Yeah,
a honey
yeah,
aficionado. So there you go.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then again, just exercise, time with family, just I think the things that everybody does, but making sure that you're showing your team too that there's life outside of work. So again, perspective. I'm a horseback rider. That's a really good sport if you want to be in the present. You can't really let your mind drift when you're on top of a 1,500-pound animal at any moment that could just throw you. So that's another one that but I think, what, surround yourself with good people. I think that's key. That's key.
I'm wondering about a few other things because I think about myself and I wrote about this um, recently. Um, I'm not somebody who's all that, it's not fair to say not self-aware. Of my body, I'm not all that aware. So if my doctor says, so have you felt tingling in your feet? And I'll say, mm, I don't know. Was I supposed to? But what I wonder is lots of times people get the physical manifestations of stress. And that's something that, for whatever reason, I'm just not necessarily all that attuned to. So I have to think long and hard and maybe ask some of those questions so that I'm not reacting, but I am responding. And I'm wondering if there are any things that you've done. Um, maybe it's associated with your diving or what have you in terms of breathing exercises or other things that are just like the way that you create the pause or the way that you check in with how you're feeling to understand whether you're running into a situation that's high stress and you need to be aware of it so you can act with the intentionality that it requires.
I have yeah, there's a way I'm going to answer this, and it actually wasn't good. Um, when things are super stressful, I get weirdly calm. I mean, I really pause. You know what I mean? It's like, and I don't know if it's because I've trained to be like that, but I'll give you an example. I just remember there were some service issues on our variable annuity side at Allianz, and the head of the variable, whatever, in distribution, the sales guy, right?
Hmm.
He's calling this DEF CON, whatever the highest one is. I don't know. And he's Italian. So he was just so fired up and just angry and what have you. And um, he wanted to meet me in the cafeteria, and I'm like, okay. So I went, and I mean, he's saying service is so bad and he didn't have any data. And so I was so calm because I'm thinking, yeah, I need to calm him down and I need to be super calm and start asking questions, So, okay, so tell me more about this. What data do you have or whatever? And he was so mad. And I know it was because I was calm. I was too calm. I wasn't matching his intensity. So then he was thinking, I don't care, because I was so calm and he was, reacting and having a fit. And the more he did that, the more calm I was. And then he's like, do you even have a pulse? He went, so I had to actually train myself to, I learned something. I'm like, well, he's not thinking I'm taking this seriously. I need to be able to do a couple of things to show him I'm listening. So parrot back to him, this is what I hear you're saying. And this is the impact it's having. I can tell that's not acceptable if that's what's happening. But Robert, let me go and collect some data. And tell them I'm a data person. And so before I go and, start all of this, let me go back and get some data. Then we can look at it together and decide what action to take. In the meantime, if you want me to, make some calls and stuff, but I didn't work with him that way at the beginning. And he was just beside himself. So I was still emotionally regulated, but I was showing him a little bit more. It doesn't mean you don't have emotions. And I think I had done that too much.
I mean,
So
that's it.
Kathy,
yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
think you're right on it. For me, you hit the crux of, I think as you spoke about personal growth and spending time outside or doing something that pulls all of your attention toward. As a younger man, I rock climbed.
yeah,
And in one phase of rock climbing where the rope's below you, you're really, really paying attention. Um, but I guess I get back to this point of, as we list these things out here, and I'm taking notes, and they're great. Like, these are great strategies. I take myself to that moment in the cafeteria with was it Robert?
yep,
Um, and in that intense moment, I think that's the moment to shape the relationship with
yeah,
a peer leader, if you're siloed in a group and another, and that is potentially a moment of breakthrough, but it's also potentially a moment of just reinforcing those boundaries and that lack of transparency and work between the groups. And personally, I think about like, wow, how do I continue to train myself to, at that moment, take a peer manager and say, okay, I understand that. Let's, like, exactly right. Like, and I'm very much a data person as well. But in that moment, I think that's that's the growth and the training, and that's also how you help move your company forward.
yeah,
So I don't know if there's a thought process and just that initial reaction of take that moment. And I mean, I've taught my children to shoot and to breathe and to
yeah,
just slow their heart rates down. And some of these things is super helpful. No doubt your husband knew that well, and thank you for his service. But
yeah.
taking it back here, what are your thoughts on helping us grow in that skill set of being in that moment of intensity, but using it to build on and not to tear down?
Well, in working with other people, it's figuring out what do they need. You know what I mean? Like, what do they need in this situation, and being able um, to help them with that, right? So again, it goes back to that clarity piece. You're stopping, you're breathing, you're getting clarity and reasoning, and if you can bring that forward, because maybe they can't yet, right? And so one of the things, again, resiliency is again getting through that change faster than your team or other people can, so you can help support and lead them. And that's the skill you're developing, because we're made to what's it called, fight or flight, right? That's how we're made. So you're really just you're retraining yourself to stop and not make one of those calls right away. But I think that's helpful if you can again find out what they need to get through that moment, and then stay a step ahead of them to help them through it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. Do
Paul,
others have? Yeah, go
Paul
ahead.
or Eric, any questions?
Any what, Steve?
Questions? Any comments?
There's one thing I had kind of on an organizational perspective that made me think, and Kathy, I think you brought up a little bit, is actually to go and test some stressful situations on teams and organizations when they don't exactly they're not in tense situations, so they can actually find out where gaps and breakages might happen to be.
In
So
preparation?
yeah,
Yeah, that you go and prepare before you actually have the stress happen. And I was thinking in the standard operating procedures and policies and all the different stuff that you have going on, that looks to go and put some guardrails and some stability with some things, but to actually go and this was the aspect of swapping the two executives as well. You don't expect them to actually be perfect. They're able to find out where they're a little weak, where it's an opportunity to
yeah.
see where those teams might be a little weak, and shore them up before something bad potentially happens.
And Eric, that's a good point, because what that did is, when the IT guy, he's in operations, and he's at somebody's desk where he can see where the change that was made through IT and wasn't tested right or something completely put this person that's trying to take phone calls and do their job at a standstill. And it gave him a different perspective that he's like, oh my gosh. So now when something does go wrong, it's just not that team over there complaining and getting us in trouble. I know that, you know, Mary is like suffering right now, and he can bring that back to his team. And I'll tell you, instead of everybody blaming each other, the resilience of just working through the problem and supporting each other gets you to the end faster in a good way. Yeah.
Steve, I
And
was going to ask, and Kathy, one of the things that you've kind of highlighted here is the role of emotions at work, right? And that, you know, being too even keeled and too steady doesn't communicate a sense of urgency or sort of work empathy that's needed in those kinds of situations. Likewise, at the other end of the continuum is being overly emotional, like your friend Robert, who, but he was probably trying to shake you and get some sort of reaction
Yeah.
out of
And he's
you.
good at sales. Hey, that
Yeah,
sells.
exactly. And understanding that and being conscious about the role of emotionality at work and when do we need that? I think that that level of emotional intelligence about how do we influence the emotions of others as well as just controlling ours, we need to be conscious of when we need to bring that emotionality to work. And you know, in the context of resilience, there's a role for emotions there in terms of urgency and kind of focusing and helping people to calm down, but also helping people to get excited and motivated.
Right. No, that's right. And humor. Oh my gosh. I kind of had to learn to scale it back because working with my German colleagues, I love humor, you know, and I'm just always the one, you know, and I had to pull it back because the Germans, again, if you're a clown, right? And they'll call you a clown. So I learned all of this kind of the hard way, but yeah, you're right. And then you have to be authentic. So how do you be authentic if you have to now act in certain, you know, you just have to find a way to be your authentic self while managing this. Yeah, absolutely. And you go to the board and yeah, you can be a little funny at the beginning, but then you get to serious. You know, there's a time and place. So yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting to me because Paul, building off what you said, there can be that time um, when being calm isn't necessarily self-regulation as much as it's suppression of other things. And if
Yeah.
and Kathy, you've had yourself in the situation there where yes, being authentic, and that's probably with just how you're built is to be able to take the moment with a bit of calm, but also at the same time recognizing that you have to match up with to some degree with the emotion on the other side of a conversation.
Absolutely. And you know, I had this conversation with my boss. So, Walt, you know, I'm like, oh gosh, I messed up, you know, and he's the CEO and you can have these conversations. It doesn't have to all be about these are real things. And he, you know, great sense of humor. So we can laugh. I said, I'm just going to use my arms more with Robert, you know, but in all seriousness, we, you know, had a conversation about it and it was a learning. And then I tell this story in my staff meeting. I learned something, team, you know, so it's being human and vulnerable with the team as well. Because then they can laugh. It's not funny. It's funny, but it's not, you know, it's my problem and I've got to correct it. So I think that's important too, um, with the team to model that. Yeah.
And for them to see you as the human that you are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, I would read my performance reviews to them. That was hard, but I would do it. So my staff meetings were very, very, we always had an HR person there. And I said, you're part of this team, even though he wasn't. He's our HR business person. I said, what stays in this room, I mean, what's said in this room stays in this room. And so you created that safe space. But yeah, I'd read them, the good, the bad, and the ugly in my performance reviews. So um, which was always hard to do, but I felt it brought us together stronger. So
That's great. That's great.
yeah.
Well, Kathy, this has been an hour chock full of learning for me, and I hope for the other people who've been here as well. So for those of you on, if I can see who everybody is, I'll be happy to send you my note taker notes on this. So you've got a copy of this for posterity. And we'll end up posting this probably on either the Executive Springboard website and or YouTube. And Cathy, this has been a joy to have you, and thankful so much for your insights today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice seeing you all.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Kathy. Thanks, Steve.